Welcome to our second Kansas 3rd Congressional District Democratic Primary Candidate Forum. Are you ready to deodorize the House? All right, I'm Sylvia Williams. I'm with Swing Left's Kansas 03. So Swing Left's only goal is to get a Democratic majority elected to the U.S. House of Representatives this fall. Nationally, we have 80 districts that are targeted as vulnerable. Swing Left does not endorse any primary candidates, but we will give full support to the winner of the primary with funding from donations to our district fund and trained volunteers for the general election. And now I'd like to introduce our Swing Left Kansas 03 Steering Committee Chair, Alan Simon.
So thank you, Cynthia, and it's good to see you all here, even in this heat, and we appreciate it. We're Democrats, so we can handle it right. So my first question for you is, how many of you plan to vote on November 6th? Yeah. It's like almost everybody. That's terrific. That's great. So now the bad news. That's not enough. Even if all of us in this room, in this building, vote for one of these candidates, it's not enough. We need to engage more voters. There's even a level, if we voted as many times as Chris Kobach thinks we're going to vote, it won't be enough. So I'm going to make a request of all of you. If one of these candidates inspires you, please volunteer for it. Please give them whatever you can. And if more than one of them inspire you, come work with us, because we're working for all of them, and we're going to be working for the winner, as Cynthia said. And I'm not asking you for as much commitment as they're giving. They're giving their lives now till November. I'm not even asking you for what our steering committee gives, 2 to 3 hours a day. I'm just saying 2 to 3 hours a week, 2 to 3 hours a month, whatever you can do, every little bit helps. So on your way out today, talk with the candidates if you haven't already, and ask them how you can help, or ask us how you can help, and we'll let you know, and we'll all be happy about that in November. Thanks very much, and enjoy the conversation.
First, after 2 minutes to introduce yourself.
Thanks for everybody for showing up today. I think I see a lot of familiar faces, and I don't want to bore you with too much of the same stuff I talked about at previous events. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's different about me than the rest of the candidates. The biggest difference I see is I ran in 2016. And what I learned from that experience was, you know, the Democrats were excited in 16. I know everybody thinks there's a blue wave here in 18, but in 16 it was pretty exciting. I mean, people were very excited to get rid of Yoder. We put a big effort out. We got the DCCC to give us a bunch of money. I mean, we ran a heck of a race. But what I learned from that experience was all the Democrats voted for me, and we still didn't win. So how do we fix that? The biggest pool of people that we need to vote for us are called unaffiliated. They don't choose a party. And the reason they don't choose a party is because they don't really want to go too far either direction, right or left. And they're more, less engaged. You know, they're not coming to events like this. They're not reading everything on the internet about candidates. And so when we talk about what you can do for us and what you can do for the party is to seek out these unaffiliated voters and convince them that this is an important election. And I'll even help you. Come to me and I will give you talking points. They won't be talking points about why you should vote for Jay Sidey. They're going to be talking points about why you should vote for the Democratic Party and why it's important you do. You know, I talk to a lot of people that are concerned about different events and how we can change them with policy. And I said the only way we can change policy is by winning elections. And the only way we can win elections is by getting people engaged that are currently on the sidelines. And I think if you want to have the most impact on what happens in the state, going after those unaffiliated voters, which is the biggest piece of the pie in the race, that'll help us. Thank you.
received an undergraduate from Pittsburgh State University in accounting and then a master's in finance from UMKC. More recently, I spent 30 years in banking and finance, where I was one of the first women in that field, in my field that I practiced in, to reach senior management. And I will say it was I had some really fun times, but it was a real challenge as a female in a male-dominated field. I went through times where I went through a merger about halfway through my career, and I found out I was getting paid even though I was running the largest department. Through the merger process, I found out I was getting paid 50% of my male counterparts, so they had to adjust it. Then also, I got married later in my life, and in my 40s, and at 45, I actually had a daughter. Now I'm 52 with a 7-year-old, and how am I doing? And with a daughter at 52. And anyway, I found out that, unbeknownst to me, I was shocked to find out that employers were required to keep your job open, but pay wasn't necessarily in the package. Really shocked me that in this day and age, paid family leave is not a required thing. When I've done some research lately and looked at where Kansas stands currently, Kansas women are paid about 77 cents on the dollar. So we have a lot of work still to do. Actually, if Kansas women were paid equally, it would actually cut the poverty rate in Kansas in half for families. And at our current rate, women will not receive equal pay till 2074. So obviously, this is something I care deeply about. I think one of the things that we need to do is send more women in Congress who've actually kind of lived the experience and can speak about what goes on in corporate America. And you can find me at sylviawilliamsforcongress.com. Thank you.
Next is Graham Weller.
Good afternoon, Democrats. You know, I was out doing a parade this morning. I was marching with Moms Demand Action, and I have to say, I think it was hotter in here today than it was out there. But I'll tell you, you know who's really feeling the heat right now is Congressman Yoder. And you know, when we have this many people packing a room in the middle of the afternoon on a Saturday, it's amazing. I want to, you know, I'm a labor lawyer. I represent union workers. My wife, Christy, also is a union-side labor lawyer. And I want Alan to know that, you know, he was talking about getting more Democrats to vote. We are expecting a new little Democrat this December. So, another Kansas Democrat. I'm raising, that will be my third little 6th-generation Kansas Democrat that we're raising. You know, I'm running for Congress because, you know, we're facing some really, really serious issues in this country. I grew up in very humble beginnings. When I was really little, the only thing my family could really afford to eat was things like hot dogs. And my mom was a social worker and a school teacher, and she had to take heating assistance to get through the bone-chilling winters for her and her children. And she has been an amazing influence on my life. She had 2 rules that were extremely important in our household. One was never ever lie, and the other was always help other people before you help yourselves. I have dedicated my life to trying to serve the underserved, to give a voice to the voiceless. I've worked with President Obama, with John Kerry. I worked in Congress as a senior staffer for the first Iraq War veteran in Congress. And I want to go to Congress and give a voice to all the people out there across Kansas and across this country that do not have a voice in our political system. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming today, especially enduring this heat. I am running for office because this is my home. I grew up in Kansas. I'm raising my family here. And 26 years ago, I made a commitment to a career of service as an educator, and I have been a teacher ever since. I am running for office because early in my career, I had students of mine cut down by gun violence. I even had a gun brought into my classroom, and nothing has changed since that time. I am running for office because before the Affordable Care Act came along, my wife was uninsurable due to pre-existing conditions. We were looking at almost certain bankruptcy, and currently the Affordable Care Act is under assault, and working families like my own, middle-class families like all of us here today, are facing similar risks of bankruptcy because health care has not been resolved. I am running for office Because as a teacher, married to a teacher, I know what it's like to work paycheck to paycheck. I know what it's like to struggle as a middle-class family, as a member of a working family, what it's like to wonder at the end of every month how you're going to make that paycheck stretch. I am running for office because as a teacher, I have conversations with my students year after year, and they tell me how frustrated and concerned they are about the world that they will inherit, and their deep concern that we have elected officials who have refused to acknowledge the problems that face that generation and have done nothing to solve them. I am running for office because every election cycle we send to Washington career politicians, bankers, lawyers, executives, people who understand very little about what it's like for the middle class, and it is about time someone from the middle class represents the middle class. And I can guarantee you that if you send me to Congress, I will work tirelessly for my community, as I have for the last 26 years as a teacher, not in the interests of political ambition or political party.
So good afternoon. I want to thank everyone who's wearing orange today. Everyone knows if you're in orange, you know why, and if you don't, ask someone who's wearing orange. There's a lot of familiar faces. Please go to our websites and find out more about us. I think you'll also know that when you get a stage of Democrats, there's usually not as many differences as you might think. But let me tell you about a couple of mine. So I tell folks that all of us are united against the idea that we want to be over Yoder. We don't want Kevin Yoder as our representative any longer. But here's the reality and the math of this district. When you stand in the line at the grocery store, look at the person in front of you in line and the person behind you in line, and remember you're the only Democrat. All right? 41% of the people in this district are Republicans. If you add the Libertarians and the Democrats together, we're still not as big as unaffiliated. We must find a candidate that is a moderate, that has the experience to make a difference and get things done. As I've been meeting thousands of people in the district, what I hear about my background that they're most interested in is that I have a wide range of experiences. I've worked in tech for 25 years. I've also worked in the nonprofit sector as well. I'm not a one-trick pony. I haven't done one thing my entire career. I also know that it's important when to stand your ground and when it's important to have the courage to compromise. This is one of the things I think is really lost in our political discourse today, is the understanding that sometimes it's better to compromise and get something accomplished than stand there and fight and get nothing. That's what's been happening. I'm sorry, I ran out of time. Oh, 30 seconds. Yeah, I thought it was all right. And the last thing I'm going to talk a lot about in between the questions, as I all think I've been told, is that we need candidates that understand the issues that are going to shape our future. And when I look out over the next 10 to 20 years, I see the fact that our election was hacked by the Russians. And when you watch the Zuckerberg hearings on the Hill, clearly no one in Congress knows anything at all about the technology industry. And that's one of the biggest differences I bring to the table, is I worked in tech for 28 years. And we'll talk more about that as the day goes on. Thank you for your time.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charisse. I am excited to be here with you all today. As you can see, I don't look like your typical congressman. And, you know, that's because your typical congressman doesn't look like America looks. Your typical congressman doesn't even look like how the 3rd District looks. We are so much more as a country and as a district than what we see represented in our leadership across the country, and particularly in Congress. You know, and if we took a snapshot of what does Congress look like, it is a pretty homogenous looking group of people. But it's not just the demographics that are homogenous, it also is in the experience of the people who are in Congress now. We have so many people in Congress who were born into circumstances and families that virtually assure that they will be able to go to top private schools, to have and attain all of the things that they hope and dream to attain with their lives. And that's part of why I'm running for Congress, because as a Native American woman who identifies as a lesbian, who grew up with a single mother, is a first-generation college student, former first-generation college student. My mom just got her degree last year in history. You know, there have been times where the odds have been stacked against me, and I have seen a level of opportunity and success in my career that has really given me the chance to bring a new voice to Congress and to help change the face of Kansas politics, because I think we're all ready for change. And one piece of evidence about my ability to reach out across multiple groups is that I was recently endorsed by Emily's List, and they only endorse candidates that are strong and viable and candidates who can win. And this is one of my most proud moments, because as a first-time candidate, I had to work really hard to make sure I achieved all that success and got this endorsement. Thank you.
All right, audience, please remember to hold your applause. It's too hot. All right. Candidates will have up to 90 seconds to answer the following questions. Ready? How do you prepare our country for the devastating effects of climate change, and what should we do to minimize its progression? We will start with Sylvia Williams.
I think one of the biggest concerns I've seen, well, there's many concerns with the current administration, but has been his success in setting us back probably over 50 years when it comes to climate initiatives. I would hope if we are able to flip the House, that we can actually put some of the Barack Obama executive orders into law and move back forward in the direction we were going. Go back and try to reinstate the Paris climate change, as well as take care of, well, we can't make changes to the EPA until we actually do in the White House, but maybe strongly encourage that we get a new EPA director. On another note, obviously Kansas is a state that has a lot of natural resources. We need to actually make sure that our state is investing in its natural resources, be it wind. And then also just make sure that our water and our air is clean.
Frank Welder.
First of all, we need to elect members of Congress that know that science is real. Unlike too many of the members of Congress and the president that we have now. The climate crisis is due primarily to one reason, and that is unfettered corporate greed. The giant corporations, the billionaires that do not care about you, that do not care about your children, would rather poison our drinking water, would rather poison the air that we breathe, than to spend a little bit of money to be able to dispose of their waste in an environmentally conscious way. Combined with that, they then pay off our politicians in Washington, and these politicians are cheap, to deregulate industry and to do things like what Donald Trump did, which is pull out of the Paris Climate Accord that was entered into by Barack Obama. I was proud to have worked for Barack Obama and to help elect him. And when we entered into the Paris Climate Accord, I was so proud to have worked to help elect somebody who was making such a difference on the world scene, in this issue and so many others. But we need to end the corporate greed. We need to stop the corruption. I will go to Congress and do that, and I will bring a voice to all of these people that are drinking the poisonous water and breathing the poisonous air. Thank you.
The first thing that I would recommend in terms of addressing this issue of climate change is that the United States rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. And then I also think one of the things we need to do is recognize that this is a global issue, and we need to, as a country, take the lead in shaping policy that curbs our consumption of fossil fuels. And one of the ways that we can do that is by ending the subsidies, the tax incentives for the fossil fuel industry. Currently, the fossil fuel industry receives over $25 billion in tax incentives. Those need to be removed, and we need to put in place tax incentives for renewable energies. Right now, renewable energies receive just a little over $1 billion a year in tax incentives. That is a gross disparity, and those tax incentives are temporary. We need to make sure that those incentives are permanent so that we can begin real investment in renewable energies. Now that has significant impact on our district because wind power, as I'm sure you're well aware, is prominent here in Kansas. Kansas is number 2 in the nation in terms of wind power potential, and we have the capacity here in the 3rd district to turn our district into a hub for the manufacture, the advanced manufacturing of the component parts of wind industry. And with subsidies toward wind industry and renewable energy, that allows us to create real jobs in industries that are fit for an economy that is designed for a future that takes into account climate change.
Mike McCammon. Please hold your applause.
So I'm glad you brought this question. It's one of the topics I don't think we talk much about on the campaign trail these days, is the environment. Like some other comments that are previously made, just to cover them off, I would say that we want to make sure that we have a competent and caring leader of our EPA. How about that for an idea? We obviously need to acknowledge the science. I agree with Brent on that. The Paris Climate Accords agree on that as well. But the thing I've learned in my professional career, and even in nonprofit, is sometimes you have to have audacious goals to get energy and effort and money behind solving problems. So the 2 big goals that I would actually advocate for when I'm elected would be that by 2030, I would advocate that the U.S. has 1/2 of all of its energy generated by renewable sources. And by 2040, I'd like for us to outlaw gasoline and diesel-powered automobiles entirely. Now, one last, since I've got 3 more seconds, I will tell you, I know most of us in here are not climate deniers, but when I was traveling in my work at water.org, you can see the effects of this for real in the developing world. When I was traveling in the northern highlands of Ethiopia, what was once a very fertile area is now a desert. When you go meet with coffee farmers in Honduras, they no longer can grow coffee on the mountain because the climate has changed, because it's such a microclimate where they live. This is very, very real, and it's something that we need to have Democrats in office that will care about our environment.
Thank you, Mike. Sharice Davis.
I like this. Next time it'll be a hook. So I actually agree with a lot of what was already said. It's our duty to be stewards of this place that we occupy. We need to be taking care of the earth and making sure our responsibility to leave this place at least a little bit better for the next generation and the following generations after that. That is our responsibility, and it's part of why I'm doing this in the middle of my career, is because I think that there are a lot of places where we see, especially in legislation, particularly when we think about the EPA, right now, the only reason that the person in charge of the EPA can try to rescind the Clean Power Plan is because we're working off of legislation that was written so long ago and didn't even conceptualize the kind of technology that we have now. So I know that we, of course, want to try to make sure that we've got good people on the executive side, but it will be our job in Congress to make sure that we write legislation that doesn't enable the head of the EPA to be able to change regulations so easily. And then second, I'll say renewables is solar jobs are the fastest growing sector of jobs in this country. We have already decided through the market that renewables is the direction we want to go, and getting rid of subsidies for non-renewables and increasing our ability to use renewables is the way.
Jay Seid.
Okay, 97% of scientists agree that global warming is our biggest threat. So I don't think we really need to educate ourselves about global warming. We all know it's real. We all know the effects it's having on the world. What we really should be asking is, why are we moving so slow away from it as a country? You look around the world, other countries are making way more progress going to green energy, and their economies are reaping the benefit. If I get to Congress, I want to push for economic reform that pushes the green energy environment in the United States, where we'll fight 2 things with 1 stone. We're going to get an economy that's based on the future, and we're going to get rid of a problem that's affecting the whole world. And the reason it's happening is because our politicians in Washington are owned by the fossil fuel industry. That's the whole thing. You know, everybody talks about we need to educate people about the environmental issues. No, I think everybody's well aware. What we need to educate people about is what's going on in Washington. And the way you can have the biggest impact is look up the leaders in the areas you live and see where they're taking money from. If they're taking money from the fossil fuel industry, that means that's who they're working for. And you look up Kevin Yoder, he's top on that list. So if you want to get rid of global warming, we need to get a congressman from Kansas in Washington, and that's the first place we can start. And then start educating people about the effects that the green energy would have on the economy and on our environment. Thank you.
If elected, will you co-sponsor H.R. 676, Expanded and Improved Medicare for All? Please explain your response. We'll start with Mr. Wilder.
You saw me jump at this opportunity. This is a question as to whether I will co-sponsor the single-payer Medicare for All bill that is in front of Congress right now. And, you know, too many politicians in this country do not have the courage to stand up to the big insurance companies and do what is exactly right. We need quality health insurance as a right for every single woman, man, and child in America. And I think almost everyone in this room knows that the only way we're going to achieve that is to follow the lead of every other industrialized nation in this country that has universal health care for every single one of their citizens. We live in the richest country in the history of this world. When I started running for Congress about a year ago, people told me, oh, well, don't talk about single-payer health care, don't talk about this resolution and this bill, don't talk about Medicare for All, because no Democrat, you know, can get elected saying that. Well, I don't believe in that. I believe that the Republicans pass crazy things by being strong and wrong, and Democrats need to start passing good things by being strong and right. I am a strong supporter of this piece of legislation. I always have been, I always will be, and I look forward to working with the 2/3 of Democrats in the United States Congress that have already co-sponsored this bill to make sure that we finally get it done.
Healthcare is without doubt an extraordinarily important issue to all of us. It is a crisis for so many of us here in the United States. In my own family's case, we were facing almost certain financial ruin because we could not afford insurance premiums. Before the Affordable Care Act came along, insurance was denied to my wife because of pre-existing conditions. So the idea of universal health care is one that I firmly believe in, and I believe that health care is a right. I also believe that we will face a tough road to get there. I will sign this bill offering universal health care, but I think that what we also need to recognize is that the cost of health care is an emergency for so many working families. It is the leading cause of bankruptcy here in the United States. In Wyandotte County alone, we have 30% of the families that owe medical bills have those bills in collections. We are looking at families who are in desperate need of help now. And it is important that we recognize the emergency that this problem poses. So what I advocate is that while we are working on a universal system, we put in place the cost-sharing reductions that Donald Trump peeled away. We put in place subsidies for premiums so that people will be able to afford health insurance. We advocate that Medicare gets the right to negotiate drug prices. That alone would save us $125 billion. Those are things that will help families now, while we work on a plan to bring us universal health care for everyone.
So here's one thing you're probably not going to expect a Democrat to do at a forum like this. I'm going to agree with President Trump. Who would have thought healthcare was so complicated? So as I've gotten into this race, one of the things I've been doing is meeting with lots of folks. I've met with lawyers who worked at Marion for 25 years. I've met with pharmacists, people that work in the health insurance industry, people that are doctors. I've met with people that are hospital administrators. And what I'm finding is that this is a very complicated problem. It's 1/6 of our economy, and there's not a simple solution to complicated problems. all right? Now, I am in favor of affordable health care for everyone. I do believe we need to have a single-payer option. But we're going to have to get there, and we can't eat the whole cow in one bite. We're going to have to start slowly and move forward with that. The first thing I would be advocating for is we absolutely need to find a way to negotiate better drug prices with Medicare. That would drastically change the marketplace. Another thing that I think we could do immediately is figure out ways to disconnect health insurance for lots of employees from their employers. Provide portability, freedom of choice across state lines. I've had firsthand experience with this. My wife has just recently finished navigating breast cancer treatment. I am all for affordable health care, but I also want to be very, very realistic that this is a very complicated problem and it does not have a simple solution.
So I think the question was, would you co-sponsor the bill? The answer is yes, I would, but I also would like us to all recognize that bills have to be signed by the president to become law, and what we need to do is work really hard to make sure that 2018 we take back the House, by 2020 we're taking back the Senate, and we're putting a new president in the office. So we all need to work together to do that. And then I agree with what Mike is saying, that if these things were simple, the answer would have already presented itself. We would already have this in law. I'm supportive of a Medicare for all, single-payer system. The thing I want us to make sure that we talk about and are thinking about is that even if we have that, a lot of people who already have health insurance know that sometimes it's still not affordable. You end up with costs that were not anticipating. And two, that there are a lot of people who will still be left out of that system, who might have coverage but still will not have access to quality, affordable health care. And I want to make sure that when we're talking about Medicare for all, that we're making sure that we're talking about marginalized people, poor people, people of color, and people who are in rural communities who do not already have access, even when they have insurance coverage. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on all of that.
Mr. Saidi.
Okay, I'm going to disagree a little bit with Mike. I don't think it's that complicated of a problem. You look around the world, other people are doing it very successfully. And you look at what's the real problem with healthcare in America. We have good healthcare. It's too expensive. That's the problem. So you look for solutions to bring the cost down. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to blow up the whole system. Because, you know, we had President Obama in office. We had a pretty good array of people in the Senate and Congress. And we still could barely get affordable care through. And so now we're talking about trying to get single payer through with Trump as president. I just think it's a little bit unrealistic to hang your hopes on that. So what we need is something in between. We need something that's going to bring costs down and not have too much opposition. Because in order to go single payer, you have to blow up the whole private system. And I talk to voters all day long, people that have, you know, wealth, and they say, I'm scared to death of a public system because it might suck. And so why would I vote for that? So there's countries like Germany and Switzerland, they have a thing called all payer. And what it does is it puts a cap on what these healthcare industries can charge for services. And the private sector acts as an agent and executes those things. So we keep all the infrastructure in place, we lower costs, we make it mandatory that everybody has coverage and everybody has to sign up for health insurance. So you shouldn't be able to walk around without health insurance and expect the taxpayers to pay the bill when you get sick. And we can fix it, it's not complicated.
Ms. Williams.
This is Jay Seide.
Sorry about that.
I'm Sylvia Williams. This is Brett Welder, Tom Neerman, Mike McCain, and Sharice Davis. Does that help? Of course we need to get to single payer, and I would sign on to the bill. I will say I have concerns with it successfully getting through over the next 2 years. One of the concerns I have with the current House bill is addressing the cost of prescription drugs. I do think we have to address the cost of prescription drugs before we expand Medicare across the entire sector of the population. When you do look at the Canvas plan, they actually don't include prescription drugs for people that are 65 and younger. They have to buy supplemental plans. So the plan that we're currently looking at is more expansive than what they have. And there's probably a reason on why they don't include the cost of prescription drugs. So I do think we have to make sure that we get some sort of oversight in the prescription drug industry. We can't have the situation where they're taking drugs, 50-year-old drugs, spinning them off, marking them up from $40 a vial to $40,000 a vial, and then trying to sell that into the system. So we need some sort of oversight to make sure that that's not on the taxpayer's dime.
The third district encompasses a wide range of economic security, from poverty to great wealth. What policies would you advocate to allow all residents of this district to thrive economically? And we'll go with Tom Neerman first.
As a teacher, my entire career, this is an issue that has been present in my classrooms. One of the things that I've always been aware of as a teacher is the idea of equity, and it's incredibly important that here, especially in the third district, but across the United States, we do everything we can to ensure equity in public education, because education is the one way that we can guarantee that our citizens have access to opportunity. Now, to be clear about my determination to ensure equity here in the third district, I want to make sure that we have all of the federal funding necessary to fully fund our Title I schools. Last summer, Kevin Yoder had the opportunity to vote in favor of increased funding. Instead, he voted for an appropriations bill that cut $2.4 billion in federal funding for Title I schools. Now, of that money, $16 million would have come to Kansas, $1 million would have come directly to the Kansas City, Kansas School District. My effort to ensure equity here in the third district would focus on equity in public education, because that's the basis of opportunity. I would also advocate for early childhood education, early universal childhood education, because we know that there's a direct correlation between early childhood education and success later on. I would also advocate for federal funding for infrastructure projects, because here in the third district we are in desperate need for infrastructure that sets the basis for further economic development in our neighborhoods.
Mike McCammon.
Thanks, Gary. So when we talk about opportunity, I would agree with Tom. Education is something we certainly need to invest in, but it is kind of a long burn. It takes a long time for it to have its impact. It's generational money. But here's a couple things I want to just quick stories. So as I've been going around the district, here's what I've learned. Now we're in Johnson County. I live in Johnson County over in South Overland Park, but I've spent a lot of time in Wyandotte as well. Did you know in the USD 500, which is the Wyandotte Unified Government, Kansas City, Kansas Public School District, there are 72 home languages spoken in that district? Do you know that when we talk about immigration as people living in South Johnson County, I think the narrative is about undocumented people from Mexico. Do you realize 11% of the people that live in this district are born in a foreign country? Mexico's #1, but India's on that list, China's on that list, Vietnam's on that list, Philippines is on that list, Pakistan, and on and on and on. So when I look at it, wow, 30 seconds. Opportunity. So the things that I would want to do is we need to have better continuity of budgeting in our government. When I talk to Burns and Mac, and I talk to the Kansas City, Kansas Public School District, I hear that the budgeting process we have makes it difficult for people to plan and grow their business, and plan their business and grow our communities. And finally, I think we need to have a more welcoming community as well. Getting a photo op with a widow is not what I would call building bridges with our immigrant communities in our community.
Thank you, Mike. Sharice Davis.
So I agree with a lot of what Tom said, actually, and as a first-generation college student, I certainly have seen the benefits of having a strong foundation, particularly in a public education system. And then also having attended community college, I'm very supportive of us trying to figure out ways to make sure that we're properly funding schools in an equitable way, and also that we're being supportive of people who decide that they want to go to college, and that we're also being supportive of people who decide that they want to go to trade schools, technical schools, because I think that that's something that we don't spend enough time focusing on or allowing for people to feel like it's a success. And the other thing I would say is investing in pre-K is as much about the whole family structure as it is about supporting the student, because there are a lot of people who are working multiple jobs, and this is a way that we can help support working parents so that their children can also have access to education, and they're able to continue to work to feed their families. They shouldn't have to work multiple jobs, but that's another topic. And then I do want to say that as somebody who spent time in transportation, I will fight tooth and nail to get us to invest in our infrastructure so that we can have the pathways to opportunity, because transportation touches every aspect of our lives: school,
Thank you,
work.
Sharice. Are you Jay Siding?
Okay, I'm Jay Siding, just in case you forgot. One of the things I like to talk about that doesn't get talked about that much, and it's probably one of the biggest issues we have in America, is income inequality. And that's what causes most of our problems as far as education and healthcare and environment. You look at Johnson County, one of the richest counties in the state, also the healthiest county in the state. You look at Wyandotte County, one of the poorest counties in the state, one of the unhealthiest counties in the state. So that's the correlation. It's all about income depravity. I mean, if you look at a chart of income inequality in the United States, I went all the way back to 1900. It stayed about the same all the way till about 1960. In 1960, it started inching up, meaning the rich were getting richer and the poor were getting poorer. And then in 1989, it shot up like a rocket ship. And anybody wonder why that happened? Why all of a sudden inequality just went through the roof? Tax structure. The tax structure was changed by Ronald Reagan, and what that did was it made the wealthiest people in the country pay a lot less taxes, and the poor people get stuck paying more taxes, and what that created was a resource deficit. So if you don't have resources, you don't have money for education, you don't have money for health care, you don't have money for infrastructure spending. So we know what the problems are, but if there's no resources to fix those, then nothing happens. And that's why nothing happens in Wyandotte County, because there's no resources to make it happen.
Thank you, Jay. Sylvia Williams.
This question is kind of interesting for me because I had an odd phone call this week out of the blue from a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. Of course, I support education and infrastructure, but I've been talking about an old law in the books called the Community Reinvestment Act. And it's exactly designed for a district like ours. It means if you have a lot of small community banks in the area, and some of them are located in wealthy areas, they're required to do outreach and do lending in lower and middle income areas. Currently, the old law needs to be modernized because community banks have figured out a way to kind of skirt the law. And in some of these forums, I've been talking about ways we can do that we need to modernize it and make it to where they can't skirt the law any longer. And obviously, I've gotten people's attention because they're concerned about that. So one of the ways we need to do is make sure that our banks are encouraging small businesses in all areas throughout the 3rd District. And we need to modernize the Community Reinvestment Act and make sure that those small businesses are getting the lending they need in all areas of the district.
Thank you, Sylvia. Brett Welder.
The people in this country who need a voice the most, who are suffering the most, who have the least amount of power, are also the people who get ignored the most every single day. And we need to talk in this country about the big issues that can bring fundamental change and improvement to the lives of the poor, the working class, women, ethnic and racial minorities who are suffering the most, who have the worst pay differential, who are suffering the most by not having adequate health care, I have been talking from the beginning of this campaign about issues that can make a real difference in the lives of people. We already talked about single-payer health care. We can make progress on that. We've already had 2/3 of the members of the House, Democrats, co-sponsor it, and we can achieve it. But also, 80% of the Democrats in the House of Representatives have co-sponsored a $15 minimum wage. Studies show that in Kansas, just to have a simple roof over your head and some healthy food on the table, $15 is what you need. I am a strong advocate for $15 minimum wage, and I am a strong advocate for debt-free college and pre-K. To help the people in our country who are suffering, I will take their voice to Washington and stand up for them on these big issues.
Thank you, Brent.
The Social Security Administration has long warned that benefits cannot be sustained at the 100% level past the early 2030s. Congress has failed to address this issue, and it has and will become more difficult to fix the nearer we get to that date. What would you propose to eliminate the funding gap, and how would you convince your fellow legislators that the time to act is now rather than when it becomes an even more imminent crisis? Mike.
The question was, here, use this mic.
Okay.
Give me some time to think and phone a friend.
Okay, the Social Security Administration has long warned that benefits cannot be sustained at the 100% level past the early 2030s. Congress has failed to address this issue, and it has and will become more difficult to fix the nearer we get to that date. What would you propose to eliminate the funding gap, and how would you convince your fellow legislators that the time to act is now rather than when it becomes an even more imminent crisis?
You got it, Jake? You good? You got it. Well, let's start off. The one thing that I really hate about the Social Security conversation, at least among Republicans, is calling it the E word. Because it's your money, you paid it in. It is not an entitlement. It is not an entitlement. All right? So I think most of us on stage would agree that Social Security and Medicare, by the way, are programs that we need to continually fund and find ways to increase funding where we can. What I'm hearing from folks in the district is that what they are concerned about is the accountability and some of the transparency around how our budgeting process is done. And the thing that we're all sick and tired of is the gridlock in Washington. So the thing that I would be advocating for when it comes to Social Security is we're not going to touch it, but the way we're going to fund it is find ways to work with other members of Congress to actually get a resolution to this issue, as opposed to standing in our corners and shouting at each other, right? As I've said earlier here today, you know, if you walk into the room and you punch someone in the face, you usually don't get very good results. Okay, so what you need to do is find a place where you can get some agreement and move forward. And I think it's very simple to see that Social Security should be well funded. It's your money.
Thank you. Sharice Davids.
Sharice Davids. So I don't know if Mike was making a reference to my campaign video or not, but if you haven't seen it, check it out. So I will say that the congressional gridlock is a huge problem that I think, can address this issue and a number of other issues by electing new candidates and people who are different than the status quo. So that's one piece, and I know Mike already touched on that. But the second piece, I would say, is that, you know, the phase out for Social Security is, I think, is troubling, because that is a place where we see that someone who makes $30,000 a year or $15 an hour, they pay more per dollar than someone who makes $250,000 a year. And I think that is a huge problem, and we need to address that. Because it shouldn't be that people who make less money end up paying a higher percentage of their income. And then the second piece I would say is that, Yeah, it's not an entitlement. I've been paying into this since I got my first job when I was 16 as a telemarketer, and which is coming in use right now. But I certainly agree that Congress needs to act on this, and the only way we're going to make that happen, and the only way we're going to make sure that we're protecting Social Security is by electing new people.
Thank you. Jay Seide.
Yes, I think Social Security was a retirement plan that was created by the government, so people wouldn't have to worry about their elderly years, not having enough money to survive, and to pull the rug out at this stage of their lives is just deplorable. And we could fix the problem. I knock on a lot of doors, and I actually knock on the Republican doors and the unaffiliated doors, and they just tell me, Jay, we have no choice. We have these budget issues. We gotta cut Social Security. And I go, well, what about military spending? Can't cut a little bit there? Or what about the subsidies we're giving the fossil fuel industry? Can we cut a little of that back? I mean, they're going after Social Security for two reasons. It's the weakest part of the electorate. The people there are not fighters. They're just gonna, they are, but they don't have the resources to fight. And so they think they can take advantage of you. And so that's why if I'm elected Congress, I'll make sure I fight for the people that deserve their Social Security, because I think it's just horrible that we're even talking about it. And there's ways to fix it. It wasn't that Social Security was a problem. They just spent the money. They spent the money on unfunded wars and given tax breaks to rich people. Why should the people that put all that money in pay for those mistakes? No, it can't happen, not on my watch.
Sylvia Williams.
Now the question was, why is now the time, correct?
What would you propose
Yeah.
to eliminate the funding gap, and why
Well,
is
the
now
perfect time to do it. It is the perfect time to do it. Large corporations just got the biggest tax cut, more than they even dreamed of getting. So we actually have an opportunity here. Now is the time to say we're lifting the cap on the employer side of FICA. That is how you save Social Security and Medicare, and that's why it's the time to do it. Brings the money, every analyst will tell you it brings enough money in to save the programs.
Brent Welder.
I was wondering if anyone was going to get to that. The reason Social Security was put into place is because we had an epidemic in this country of the elderly that were completely impoverished. People that worked hard their entire lives, kept their nose clean, were promised the American dream, and weren't able to afford even the basics, a roof over their head, medication, healthy food. The way Social Security was designed, it's a great program, and it is fully solvent. In fact, the way it was designed, it actually provides a surplus. The only reason that we face supposed fiscal problems with Social Security is because the Republicans in Congress and Republican presidents keep borrowing money from the Social Security Trust Fund to pay for wars that are unnecessary, to pay for tax cuts for billionaires and giant corporations, and that needs to end. When a right-winger tells you that Social Security is an entitlement, what I suggest you say is, if you think it's an entitlement, it's because we have paid in our entire lives out of every single one of our paychecks. And yes, we are entitled to our own money. That's what it is. If you think of Social Security as, yes, a government-designed retirement program that everyone pays into out of every paycheck, could you imagine if your private 401k or private retirement program told you they weren't going to give you the money that you paid in? There would be riots in the streets, and I will not stand for it.
Tom Neerman.
Every year, I always teach my students about the introduction of Social Security. It came about during the Great Depression as a way to protect the elderly from living in poverty. And the Social Security system was set up so that we would have retirement safety nets in perpetuity. We did not run into difficulty with Social Security until the tax breaks of the 1980s came along. And it's at that point we began to worry about how Social Security was going to be funded, and that's because of those tax policies, and we are seeing it again. In order for us to correct the solvency issues with Social Security, we need to do exactly as has been mentioned before. We need to address the underlying tax issue. And it is time that everyone pay their fair share when it comes to our taxes. And by everyone, I mean the corporations, I mean the billionaires. And I don't know of anyone with a straight face who can tell me that this last tax cut that was put in place, which gives the Koch brothers a combined $1 billion in tax cuts, is fair, while the rest of us are wondering if Social Security will be there when we retire. The way we correct Social Security is by going back and correcting the mistakes made by the tax policies put in place by this administration.
Thank you.
What ideas will you support or promote regarding campaign finance laws? We'll start with Sharice Davis.
Sharice Davis. So, the struggle is real. I know it can be hard to hear. So, there's a couple of things. I feel like I'm feeling this very acutely right now as somebody who is coming into this campaign from a family that doesn't have any money. As a person who has decided to live my life and pursue a career that was not focused on making a whole bunch of money. So I don't have money to put into the campaign. I don't have a whole bunch of rich friends that I can call and ask for large sums of money from. And I don't have a bunch of connections to quote-unquote dark money. I don't have connections to PACs and that sort of thing. So I would propose that what we do is, one, limit, there are so many things that with super PACs that cause problems. I think it's already been talked about. The Koch brothers obviously have been spending wildly to be able to influence our elections. I think that we need to, one, make sure that corporations are not recognized as people for purposes of First Amendment rights. They should not be able to spend as much money as any of us could ever fathom on an election to ensure that they have chosen the candidate that will win. And then I do think that we should really consider looking at publicly financed elections, and I think that's something that we need to start talking about and engaging a conversation on.
Thank you. Jay Seiden.
I think money in politics is the root cause of most of our problems. You look at America, it's a for-profit political system. If you get into a race, I know it happened to me when I jumped in 2016, all they told me to do was raise money. And that's what they thought I was good at. That's why they recruited me. They said, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to call all your friends and family and ask them for money. And I go, most of my friends and family don't like politicians. So I don't know if I'm going to get a lot of money. But I jumped in thinking, well, I'm going to try and play the game the way I think it should be played. And I'm trying to go out there and tell people why it's important for people like me to win. I've been in the corporate world. When I was at ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, the largest commodity processor in the world, we bought politicians like toilet paper. They were a good investment. For a little bit of money, we could get a lot of bang. And that's what's wrong with our system. We need to design a publicly funded system that gets the money out, and then the people will actually get representatives that are there for the right reasons, and they're representing the people, not the people buying our government like corporate America. Thank you.
Thank you. Sylvia Williams.
Okay, I don't know if everybody remembered when I gave my short bio, but my undergraduate was in accounting, and my dad was an IRS agent for 35 years. And if you recall when Citizens United passed, they all started freaking out when they were filing to be 501c4s, and the IRS said, hey, we don't know if we're going to give you tax exempt status because we don't know if you really fit this, I think it's social welfare. And so we might make you, it wasn't they were telling them that they couldn't exist with all the dark money when they ran. They were just saying you can't do it tax exempt, because if they made them taxable, they would be subject to audit. That is the last thing they want. So I think one of the quickest ways we can actually address getting a lot of the money out of there is actually to change the tax code for 501c4s and actually not make them tax exempt. First of all, at least as taxpayers, we get to keep 22% of the money raised by PACs, but also the IRS then would have audit oversight over all these organizations, and I think we would find that they would be a lot more suspect, or certain people would be a lot more nervous about giving money, and I think it would reduce a lot of the money that shouldn't be coming in.
Thank you. Grant Wilker.
I think this just might be the most important issue that we have to deal with before we're able to solve a host of other problems that face this country. This has been an issue that I've been really active fighting against corruption in government, against big money in politics throughout my adult life. One of the, I think, leaders in our party who undeniably is one of the strongest voices on getting big money, getting corporate money out of politics is Senator Bernie Sanders, who showed us that he was able to run a strong, viable campaign without taking corporate PAC money, without taking super PAC money, and getting millions and millions of people to chip in and help. And he was allowed fit to nominate 50 people from across the United States to serve on the Democratic National Platform Committee. And I was honored to be one of those 50 people that he chose. And at his request, I wrote and I fought for an amendment for our Democratic Party platform that said that as a party, we need to stand for banning corporate money and big money from politics altogether. But unfortunately, what I found was that there were too many people, too many Democrats even in that room, that are not representing us and that would not support such an amendment. And it made me realize that we need change in Washington, not just to change the Republicans, but change within our own party. I will continue to fight for strong campaign finance reform so that regular people have a voice in this country.
Tom Nerman.
Campaign finance reform is certainly an important issue that has to be addressed. And I think the place to begin is doing everything possible to reverse the Supreme Court ruling in Citizens United. That court case allows billionaires and corporations to purchase legislators, and I think our current representative is a classic example of a legislator who has been purchased by billionaires. And I also like to point out that it's important that we take money out of politics because campaigns like mine are impossible in this current age. The only reason I am able to run for office, the only reason that we have a voice for the middle class in this election is because of the extraordinary effort that people are making in order for voices like mine to be heard. Teachers don't run for office because we can't afford to run for office. It requires a person to give up their job for a year and a half in order to spend time raising money in order to run for office. That has to change if we are serious about preserving our democracy, if we are serious about making sure that all of us have a voice in how our country is run. Reversing Citizens United is the best place that we can begin, and I would work tirelessly towards putting forth those policies that would undermine Citizens United until its effects are entirely withdrawn.
Thank you, Tom Nerman. Mike McCammon.
So the benefit and problem of going last is all the ideas that have been shared. So I'll give you a couple of, I agree with most everything that's been said, particularly around Citizens United is obviously a big part of this. So philosophically, what I would say is we spend a lot of time talking about getting access to the polls, but what this fundamentally is around the question of the access to the ballot. When you ask, and all of us have had this experience, when you decide to run for office, everyone will tell you, you can spend 40 hours a week, making 170 phone calls a day, asking for money. This election, as of March 31st, had already spent $672,000 trying to get you to vote for one of these people on the stage. By the time we get to the end of the primary, we'll probably spend over $1 million. That's $1 million that we could spend on trying to get Kevin Hilder in the fall. But we won't. We'll spend it here. So when it comes to campaign finance reform, I'd actually like to see us put ourselves on a diet. Say, I won't spend more than $25,000 trying to get the nomination. What I might actually do is figure out a way to take money and get the party to help people that may not have access to the ballot, to find more minorities, find more women, find more people from the other side of the check, like I was. Those are the types of things we need to do, along with Citizens United, to make sure more people have access to the ballot. And that's how we will have a better democracy going into the future.
Thank you, Mike.
In order to win the general election in the 3rd District, you will need to get votes from Republicans and unaffiliated voters. If you win the primary, how will you appeal to voters who are not registered Democrats? Yeah, Mr. Seide.
This is right in my wheelhouse because that's what I focus on. Like I said, one thing I learned from my race in 2016 was I could get all the Democrats in the district to vote for me, and we can't win. And I knew that going into the race, so I did a lot of focus on what do people, the unaffiliated voters. I talked to a lot of Republicans, and I turn a few of them, but it's kind of like a religion. You know, once they've decided they're Republican, they're staying, logic goes out the window. So I've kind of realized my potential to do it there. But, well, like I told you earlier, I worked for a big corporation. I was a commodity trader. I had a degree in economics, and when I got there, my first days on the job, I started talking about the economic things that are going on and how that's going to affect commodity prices. And all the people that have been there for years looked at me and said, Jay, we don't care about any of that stuff. And I go, why? They go, well, the world runs on 3 things: hope, fear, and greed. You know, logic is not one of those. So when we go out and try to talk to people, the Republicans are good at using fear and greed. That's why the Trumpsters are voting for Trump. He got fear going in them, and why the top 1% or 2% are voting for Trump, because he got the greed factor going. So we have to learn how to control those emotions in people and go to those people and flip it on them. Go to those people that are unaffiliated and say, put the fear of God into them that we need to change things or this is going to happen. The economy is going to fail and we're all going to be worse off.
Thank you. Sylvia Williams.
And I think this is a great question. One thing that's been interesting in this whole primary process for me is everyone keeps going, oh, you're the moderate. And what's kind of funny is when I look at my policies, Brent, you have to admit, I pretty much line up with Brent, but for some reason, everyone views me as the moderate. So as much as that might be a weakness for me in the primary, I think that means for some reason I come across in the general as a moderate, which I think actually will help attract a lot of votes. Another thing I think that helps is over the last couple of years, especially having a young daughter, I've really entrenched myself in the community, and I've been leader of the Girl Scouts of America. I spent a lot of time with United Methodist Women. I've joined groups out south called Building Better Moms that do a lot of community work throughout the entire Kansas 3rd. Member of Moms Demand Action. I think those kind of community roots help. A lot of them are nonpartisan groups, and I think that has given me a lot of exposure to have a lot of support across party lines.
Brent Wilder.
We live in a district that is one of only 5 Republican-held congressional districts in the country that was won by Hillary Clinton in the general and Bernie Sanders in the primary. There is a proud, progressive base in this district. And I think it's really a myth to think that, oh, we just need to attract a bunch of Republicans to vote for us. You know what we need? What we need, for one, we already start with a base that Hillary Clinton won. Then we need to attract back the people that voted for Obama and then voted for Donald Trump. And I'm telling you, because I've been out knocking doors every single day, these are not the country club Republican crowd. These are working families that were tricked when Donald Trump used Republican right-wing wedge issues to get their votes, even though they voted for Barack Obama. I have been working hard to earn back those people that voted for Obama and voted for Donald Trump. I am so proud to have been endorsed by numerous labor unions, painters, construction workers, railroad workers, nurses, truck drivers. So many people that voted for Barack Obama and voted for Donald Trump, but will come back to the Democratic Party if we make a strong case that we will give them power back. We will give them financial strength back, and we'll take care of them and their families.
Tom Mearman.
Having grown up in Kansas and for having lived in the 3rd District for as long as I have, I can tell you that people are interested in good government. And they are frustrated that we have a representative who has largely abdicated any sort of responsibility to the people who live here in the district. So when I'm talking to voters in the 3rd District, whether I'm talking to Democrats or Republicans, my message is the same. And that message is focused on local issues. What people are concerned about here in the 3rd District are the same things that we are concerned about. They want good schools. They want to know how the federal representative can help us make our schools as good as possible, especially in the wake of a tax experiment that our state legislature has used to weaken our schools. People here in the 3rd District want to know what we can do to address health care costs. And regardless of whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, families are struggling for health care costs. People also want to know what we can do to create good-paying jobs. And so I've talked to people about how we can turn the 3rd District into a hub for advanced manufacturing for the component parts of wind industry. What we focus on is making sure that this federal office is a federal office that serves the people of this district. That's not a Republican issue, that's not a Democrat issue. That is an issue that is important to the people in our communities simply because we are fellow citizens of the same community. The support I've received throughout this campaign has come from both Democrats and Republicans. The emphasis that I'm putting on this campaign is that these issues that we're talking about are issues that are important to all
Thank
of us.
you. Mike McCammon.
I've got more on that later.
So I've talked a little bit about this. I've met with a lot of folks in the district, and here's one thing I would tell you in terms of trying to get unaffiliated Republicans to vote for our side. What I've heard consistently is that these individuals will tell me they don't necessarily disagree with Kevin Yoder's policies, how he's been voting on things. So I'm not sure there's a policy kind of place to go. But what I am hearing is that what they're most upset by is that Kevin Yoder has never once stood up to our president and said, what you just said is awful. Every single day, every single week, there's another opportunity. I could even go as conservative to how hard it would be Kevin Yoder to one time to say, Mr. President, an awful joke about an American hero like John McCain is an awful joke. He won't do it. So what this gets down to, I think what we need to do to win back this district is to talk to people about our integrity. Tell our stories about how we're Kansans, that we care about this part of town, that we raised our kids here, that we're going to stay here, and we're going to stand our ground. Because this is our town. This is not Donald Trump's town, and this is not even Kevin Yoder's town. 97% of the time, he votes for the president. He's wrong. He's wrong. And it's our opportunity to take that back in November. We have to win the unaffiliated, and the Republicans are, again, we will lose in November, so we have to find a way to reach out to those individuals.
Sharice Davids.
I get this question a lot. I think it's because of my demographics, it's interesting because I actually grew up with a whole lot of Republican friends, and one of the things that I'm most disheartened about in this last election cycle, and then in the years leading up to that, is that we talk about Republicans, Democrats, Johnson County, Wyandotte County, as if all of these things are monoliths. So I think one of the first things that we should all do is try to remember that all of us have a lot of very similar experiences. You don't have to raise your hands, but how many people in your life have felt like no one was listening, like no one in the government cared, like the decisions were already made before you even found out about them? These are the kinds of things that all of us experience, regardless of whether we're Republicans or Democrats. And I think that what we need are politicians who want to listen to people, regardless of what their party affiliation is, regardless of which county they're in and how much money they can give to the campaign. If I've seen anything in this entire process, it's that more often than not, people are surprised that I want to listen to them instead of just talk about myself. And that is very disheartening when you think about who we're sending to DC and who we're sending to the governor's mansion. I mean, we need as politicians to be thinking about how we listen to people regardless of what their background is and who they are.
Thank you.
All right, now each candidate will have up to 90 seconds for closing remarks. And the first one is Ms. Sylvia Williams.
First, I want to thank everyone for coming out, especially on this hot afternoon, especially with no air conditioning. And I wanted to say, this election really does scare me. My husband and my small daughter are here today. She's 7, and one of the main reasons I got into this race is just the idea of potentially having Trump as our president, Kobach as our governor, and Yoder still as our House rep, just really frightens me. I mean, you gotta, we all have to stand up and make sure that we do the right thing and fight against things like that. I brought up that I was a leader for a Daisy troop this last year, and if you want to talk about a hard job, my 30 years in banking was nothing versus trying to keep track of 15 first graders throughout this whole year. But when you just spend time with groups like that, you just realize that we can't end up with the 3 people I just mentioned. So I hope to earn everyone's vote. I think I'm someone that can actually attract votes from the other side, and I promise that if I'm the one that goes to Washington, I will stand up and call Trump's comments on the parliament. And it's go to Sylvia Williams for Congress.com.
Thank you, Sylvia. Brent Welder.
The stakes are so high in this election. We have a maniac president that needs to be stopped, and we have problems in this country that need to be fixed. And the only way we're going to win this important swing district is by winning back those people that voted for Barack Obama and then voted for Donald Trump. Those working families that are suffering and struggling, and we need to tell them, don't fall for those Republican wedge issues. We have policies that can help you. Medicare for all, good wages, good pensions, debt-free college education for your children. We can and will win these people back. And the proof, I think, has been shown in our campaign. I've been fighting for these issues from the beginning, and we are now beating, I am in the polls, Kevin Yoder by 7 points in independent polling of this district among general election voters. It's the largest margin of any Democratic challenger in the entire country. We've been endorsed by numerous labor unions, painters, construction workers, railroad workers, nurses. We've been endorsed by Jason Kander, who's helping us out, by Patrick Murphy, the first Iraq War veteran in Congress, who also was Secretary of the Army for President Obama. There's so many people across the country, over 10,000 people have either volunteered or donated to my campaign. We don't take corporate PAC money. I will stand up for you. Please join us at brentwelder.com. We can beat Kevin Yoder. We can change Congress. We can stop Donald Trump. And we can bring a voice back to the voiceless in this country.
Tom Nierman.
You've heard me say this before, and I'll say it again. I think our current class of political leaders has strayed an awfully long way from the idea of a citizen legislator that I teach my students about. I am a member of the middle class. I understand exactly what it's like for those of us who work paycheck to paycheck, who struggle with the issues of working families, because I've lived that role as a member of a working family. I work with young people every day. I've worked with them for the last 26 years, and I know the issues that are facing them. I know the issues that they are frustrated with. I know the concerns that they have about the future that they will inherit. As a scholar of American history, however, I am convinced that there is more that unites us than divides us, and the discussions that I hear so frequently about big government versus small government are discussions that I'm not interested in. I am interested in discussions about good government, government that is responsive to the needs of the people in our communities. And I can guarantee you that as your representative, I will work tirelessly to make sure that government serves the people that it is supposed to represent. It is my sincerest hope that over the course of the campaign, that I earn your support as we work to restore the idea of government that serves the people. Thank you.
So my name is Mike Buchanan, and I'm running for U.S. Congress. I would say the State of the Union is somewhat frightened. Here's what I would ask you. Are the Russians in your home? Did you reboot your router? The FBI asked you to do that, by the way, because there's malware on your router in your home that's from Russia. So we need to talk about the problems we've talked about today, but we need to have candidates that understand the problems of tomorrow as well. The issues that are right over the hill about online privacy, security, identity. The person you just friended on Facebook today, when you go on to create an account on Facebook, do you have to give someone your actual real name? Or a real picture? Or where you really live? Is that really your neighbor? Or is it a Russian bot, like stole our 2016 election? This is actually going to be the challenge of our times, is figuring out how we're going to use technology for good and not for evil. And I am the only candidate, one of 4 in the entire United States that's running for Congress as a freshman that has any measurable experience in the tech sector. 28 years. Apple, Intel, made Bluetooth possible. I've lived abroad, I've traveled the world, figuring out how we can make technology useful to the rest of us. And that's the kind of person we need to have in Congress in 2018, not the Congress we needed in 2010.
Thank you. Sharice Davis.
I'm Sharice Davids. I'm running for Congress. My website is shariceforcongress.com. I always forget to say that at the end, so I'll say it now. I'm here to be a representative because what we need is something to vote for. We talk an awful lot about Kevin Yoder and Donald Trump and all of the policies that we don't like, and certainly we need to be focused on that, but we also need to be focused on the things that we can do as individuals to make a difference. And I think one of the biggest things that I have seen during this entire process is how often we forget how powerful our individual voices can be. And during my time in DC, and while I was implementing federal policy on the Pine Ridge Reservation, the thing that I saw the most was that it just takes one voice sometimes to completely change the direction of a conversation, or a piece of legislation, or a piece of policy. And this is the power that we have in this room, and this is the power we have collectively this year in 2018. We can make a difference because each of us individually has the power to do that. I am using my voice and the individual power that I have to run for Congress so that I can go out and listen to as many people in the 3rd District as possible and take that voice to Congress so that we can start to see a meaningful change in a positive direction. And that's what we need in 2018, and it's what we're going to need moving forward. I would appreciate your vote. Please vote for me on August 7th in the primary. I look forward to seeing you all in the general.
Okay, I'm going to kind of put it into a nutshell. You know, we've been here today talking about all the issues that affect America and the 3rd District. But you know what? If we don't beat Kevin Yoder, it doesn't matter what we think here on stage. That's the big problem. So we got to start thinking about how do we beat Yoder? And if you look at everybody behind me, they're all good people. I like them all. I hate primaries because I don't like to get up and compete against people I actually like. But the difference between me and everybody up on this stage is I did a lot of research in 2016 before I ran. And I knew that I had a 97% chance of losing in 16. I didn't tell my wife. She wouldn't have let me done it. But it's any first-time candidate running against an incumbent has, you know, long odds of winning. So when I ran, I called all my friends that do have money and said, hey, can you give me some money so I can run for Congress? They go, Jay, you can't win. Why would I bet on you? And I go, well, I know I can't win in 16, but I looked at the research. If I run in 16 and do a decent job and come back and run in 18, my odds go to 40%. And now we got a little bit of a blue wave. So I think I have a 50% chance of beating Yoder, only because I was here in 16, built a political footprint, got the name recognition. Those unaffiliated voters we've been talking about all day, their number one thing they look at is name recognition. When they walk into the voting booth, they go, should I vote for Kevin Yoder or somebody I've never heard of? They'll vote for Kevin Yoder because they think, well, I'd rather vote on a known entity than somebody I've never heard of. So I can beat Yoder. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to
whatever needs to be done to defeat Kevin Yoder and stop Donald Trump.
The same, whether that's canvassing, making phone calls, speaking at appearances, showing up at events to pass out literature. The one thing we have to make sure that we're doing, if we are serious about defeating Kevin Yoder, is making sure that our candidate has the name recognition and is everywhere that we can possibly be. And I would help in that cause.
Well, a lot of ways. One that comes to mind is I would take the 140 leaders in the district that I've met over the last 3 months, and I would introduce you to the mayors of Kansas City, Kansas, and Maywood and Prairie Village, chiefs of police, school districts, and all the rest.
Three things. One, I'll let you superimpose your face on my campaign video. No, the one who's making the change. And then, second, I would like for all of us to get together and make sure that we have a significant conversation about all of the things that we learned from all the meetings we've had, and make sure that we're really getting as much information about what the people in the 3rd District want. And then the third thing is exactly what Tom said. Get out, canvass. I will put every single ounce of energy I can into making sure that Kevin Yoder is defeated. I'm doing it now, and I'll continue to do it into the general.
One of my favorite quotes in life is somebody told me, if you're not having fun, you're doing something wrong. And I tell you what, even though it's hard to believe, I'm having a lot of fun running for office. And so whoever wins the primary won't have any problem getting me to be involved, because I enjoy it, and it's something I feel good about. When I'm 90 years old, laying in my bed, going, did I ever do anything to help humanity? I can say, yes, I did. Thank you.
And I'll do all the same things that they said, but I'll add one to it. I did a protest last fall for healthcare outside of Mr. Yoder's office with Indivisible, and I'm willing to go back outside his office and carry someone's sign and stand there for a few hours and have some fun.
Well, thanks to all the candidates for sharing your thoughts, and thank you so much for the sacrifice you're making in order to try to make this a better country for us all. Appreciate it.